I stood in our apartment, boxes packed around me, when I heard his key in the lock. 3 days with his ex to get closure, he'd said. Now he froze in the doorway, staring at the engagement ring I'd left on the counter. "What are you doing?" he whispered. I smiled for the first time in years. Moving on. What he didn't know, while snooping through his phone last night, I discovered they weren't just getting closure. They were planning a future. One that didn't include me. The look on James's face was almost worth the 3 years I'd wasted on him. Almost. His perfectly styled hair couldn't hide the slight tremor in his hands as he set down his overnight bag. The one I'd given him for our second anniversary. "Mira, what is all this?" His voice was carefully controlled, the same tone he used when talking me down from what he called my overreactions. I continued, taping up a box labeled books. My books. The ones he'd always complained took up too much space on our shelves. "I think it's pretty obvious, James. If this is about me spending the weekend with Vanessa, we talked about this. You said you understood." I had said that 3 days ago as I helped him pack that same overnight bag. I'd nodded and smiled when he explained that he needed closure with his ex before our wedding. I'd squeezed his hand and told him I trusted him. Like the perfect, understanding fiancé I'd always tried to be. "You should go shower," I said, not looking up. "You smell like her perfume." His face flushed. "This is ridiculous. You're overreacting." "Am I? Interesting that's your first response." Not denial. His eyes darted around the half-packed apartment, calculating. I could almost see the wheels turning as he tried to figure out exactly how much I knew. "Look, I don't know what you think happened, but Vanessa and I just talked. That's all." He stepped closer, reaching for me. "Baby, come on. You know how much I love you." I stepped back. "Don't touch me. Mira." I saw the texts, James. The silence that followed was deafening. His face went from confusion to shock to something darker. "You went through my phone?" His voice had that dangerous edge now, the one that usually made me backpedal and apologize. "Not today." "Yes, I did. Last night when you accidentally sent me that message meant for her." I kept my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "The one where you said you couldn't wait to finish what we started once you took care of things here." He ran a hand through his hair. "That wasn't. You're taking it out of context." "Really? And what context would make that okay? Or the messages about the apartment you're looking at together? Or the joint bank account you opened last month?" His eyes widened slightly. He hadn't known I'd found that part. "I can explain." "Save it." I gestured to the counter where my engagement ring sat. "I left that for you. You can give it to Vanessa once your divorce is finalized." "Divorce? We're not even married yet." "Exactly. And we never will be." I picked up a framed photo of us from the bookshelf and handed it to him. "Here, a souvenir." His fingers closed around the frame, knuckles white. "You're making a huge mistake." "No, I already made the mistake. Dating you. Believing you. Agreeing to marry you." I stared at him, really seeing him for the first time. The handsome face that had charmed me now looked cold, calculating. "You're a liar, James. You've been lying to me our entire relationship." "That's not." "Remember last Christmas when you missed my family dinner because you had to work late? You were with her. Labor Day weekend when you had that business trip? With her. Even our engagement night, you stepped out to take a work call right after proposing. That was her too, wasn't it?" The slightest twitch in his jaw told me I was right. "How did you find out?" "I called your office yesterday. They said you'd taken personal days, not business trips, on all those dates." I zipped up my suitcase. It wasn't hard to put it together after that. I glanced at my watch. Elena would be here any minute to help with the boxes. My sister, who James had always found a way to criticize, keeping me distant from the one person who might have seen through him sooner. "I transferred my half of our savings to my personal account," I said. "Don't worry, I left yours alone. Though that's more courtesy than you showed me when you drained $2,000 last month for the deposit on that apartment with Vanessa." His expression darkened. "You had no right." "I had every right. It was my money too." I took a deep breath. Elena will be here soon to help me move the rest of my things. I'd prefer if you weren't here when she arrives. You're going to your sister's? He laughed coldly. The sister you always complain about? How long do you think that will last before you come crawling back? Those were your complaints, James. Not mine. I turned away from him, resuming my packing. And I'm not coming back. Not this time. James lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. You can't just leave. Let go of me. My voice was steady despite the fear pulsing through me. This was the moment I'd been dreading, when the mask would fully slip. Not until you listen to reason. His grip tightened. You're being hysterical. We can work this out. There's nothing to work out. I yanked my arm free, backing toward the kitchen where my phone lay on the counter. It's over, James. His handsome face contorted, the charming smile I'd fallen for 3 years ago replaced by something ugly and unfamiliar. After everything I've done for you? I pulled you out of nothing, Mira. Who do you think paid for those design classes you never finished? Who got you the job at the gallery? I earned that job on my own. He laughed, a harsh sound that made my skin crawl. Is that what you think? Martin owed me a favor. You think he hired you because of your mediocre portfolio? The words stung, echoing doubts he'd planted over years. I flashed back to our first date, how he'd praised my photography but suggested little improvements. How those suggestions gradually became criticisms, until I'd stopped showing him my work altogether. Even if that's true, I said, I don't care anymore. The doorbell rang. Relief flooded through me. Elena was early. James's eyes darkened. Of course. Running to Big Sister to rescue you. Just like when we met. I moved toward the door but he blocked my path. Move, James. We're not done talking. Yes, we are. I raised my voice, hoping Elena would hear. I said we're done. The doorbell rang again, followed by pounding. Mira? It's me. Open up. James glared at the door. Tell her to leave. No. If you do this, if you walk out, don't expect to come back. He lowered his voice, switching tactics. Baby, please. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. Whatever you saw, it wasn't what you think. The familiar pleading tone almost made me waver. How many times had I forgiven him after similar conversations? What wasn't what I think, James? The hotel charges on our shared credit card? The messages planning your future together? Or the fact that you've been sleeping with her our entire relationship? That's not. Don't lie to me. My shout surprised us both. Not anymore. The pounding on the door grew more insistent. Mira. Open this door or I'm calling the police. James's expression hardened. Fine. Go to your sister. But don't think you're taking anything I paid for. I'm only taking what's mine. Really? He gestured around the apartment. The rent, the furniture, your car payments. What exactly did you pay for, Mira? You can barely support yourself. The words hit their target. I'd let myself become financially dependent on James, allowing him to take control of our finances early in our relationship when I was between jobs. It had seemed helpful at first, then necessary until I couldn't remember the last time I'd made a major purchase without his approval. That doesn't mean I have to stay with the cheater. Where will you go? What will you do? You think Elena wants a freeloader? His tone softened, becoming reasonable, the voice that had talked me out of countless decisions. Be smart, Mira. We can work past this. Couples therapy, maybe. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if he was right? What if I couldn't make it on my own? Then I remembered the photo I'd found last night. James and Vanessa together at a restaurant just 2 weeks after he'd proposed to me. The date stamp didn't lie. I'd rather be homeless than spend another minute with you. I reached for the doorknob but he grabbed my arm again, harder this time. You're not thinking clearly. The door burst open. Elena stood in the doorway, eyes blazing as she took in the scene. Get your hands off my sister. James released me immediately, his expression shifting to the charming mask he wore in public. Elena, this is just a misunderstanding. Save it. Elena stepped inside, positioning herself between us. I've listened to Mira defend you for 3 years. I'm done listening. I grabbed my suitcase and the box of books. Let's go. James followed us to the door. This is a mistake, Mira. You know you can't make it without me. I turned to face him one last time. Watch me. As we walked to Elena's car, James called after me. What about the wedding? What am I supposed to tell people? Tell them the truth, I called back without turning around. Or don't. I don't care anymore. Elena helped me load my things into her trunk. You okay? I took a deep breath, looking up at the apartment building that had been my home, my prison for the past 2 years. No. But I will be. As we drove away, I deleted James's number from my phone. My hands were shaking, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear. It was from freedom. He's going to try to get you back, Elena warned as we turned the corner. Men like him always do. I know. I watched the building disappear from view. But I'm not the same person he left 3 days ago. Elena reached over and squeezed my hand. No, you're not. You're the sister I remember. The one who doesn't take anyone's crap. For the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. A real smile, not the carefully composed one I'd practiced in mirrors to please James. Thank you, I said quietly. For not giving up on me. Never. Elena glanced at me. So what's the plan now? I looked out the window at the city passing by. I don't know exactly. But for once it's my plan. No one else's. Elena's guest room felt both foreign and familiar. The walls were a soft blue I would never have chosen for myself. James insisted our apartment remain neutral with whites and grays only. The twin bed was smaller than I was used to, but somehow more comfortable. 3 days had passed since I'd walked out. 3 days of jumping whenever my phone buzzed, expecting James's name to appear on the screen. But after a barrage of texts the first night, alternating between pleading and threatening, there had been silence. Till now. Your card has been declined, said the barista, handing back my credit card. The line behind me shifted impatiently. That's impossible, I said, fumbling through my wallet for another card. Try this one. The barista ran it through, then shook her head. Sorry. Heat crept up my neck as I searched for cash, finding only a crumpled $5 bill. Just a small coffee then. Outside the coffee shop, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Both credit cards were listed as account closed. My checking account, which had held nearly $4,000 yesterday, now showed a balance of $13.46. My hands shook as I called the bank. I'm sorry, Ms. Patel, the customer service representative said after verifying my identity. It appears your joint account holder made a withdrawal yesterday afternoon. As for the credit cards, as the primary account holder, Mr. Wright has authorization to close those accounts. But that was my money, I said, my voice rising. My paycheck was deposited there. I understand your frustration, but with joint accounts, both parties have equal access. I'd suggest coming into a branch to open a new account in your name only. I ended the call and leaned against the building, taking deep breaths. James had warned me before I left, you'll regret this. But I hadn't expected him to move so quickly. When I returned to Elena's apartment, she was waiting with a glass of wine and a sympathetic expression. You heard? I asked, dropping my purse on the counter. James called me. He handed me the wine. He said you'd stolen money from him and he was forced to protect his assets. I laughed bitterly. Of course he did. He also mentioned that if you're reasonable and come home, he's willing to forgive you. Forgive me. The wine glass trembled in my hand. He's the one who... I know. Elena sat beside me on the couch. He's gaslighting you, Mira. It's what he does. I nodded, remembering the arguments where I'd start out certain I was right, only to end up apologizing for things I hadn't done. I should have seen it sooner, I whispered. Don't do that to yourself. Elena took my hand. The important thing is you see it now. Later that evening, as I unpacked the few boxes I'd managed to take, I found a framed photo I'd forgotten about. Me at my college graduation before I'd met James. My smile was wide and genuine, my eyes bright with possibility. I barely recognized that woman. What happened to you? I whispered to my younger self. The answer came in fragments of memory. James criticizing my friends until I stopped seeing them. Suggesting I quit my job at the magazine because it was beneath my talents, only to later imply I wasn't qualified for better positions. The way he'd check my phone claiming he was just using Google, then question me about male names in my contacts. It hadn't happened overnight. It had been gradual, erosion rather than earthquake, until I'd shaped myself entirely around his expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You can't hide it, your sisters forever. We need to talk. Jay." He'd already gotten a new number that I hadn't blocked. I showed Elena. "Change your number tomorrow," she said firmly. "And we should talk to someone about a restraining order." "Isn't that extreme?" "Mira, he cleaned out your bank account and is tracking you down through new phone numbers. This isn't normal breakup behavior." I knew she was right, but part of me still wanted to believe James was just hurt, that he'd calm down and be reasonable. The thought made me realize how deeply his conditioning had affected me. I was still making excuses for him. The next morning, I walked into the small bookstore near Elena's apartment. The help wanted sign had been in the window for weeks. "No experience necessary," said Diane, the owner, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. "Just a love of books and basic computer skills." "I have both," I said, trying to sound confident despite the professional gap in my resume. After quitting my magazine job at James's suggestion, I'd only worked part-time at an art gallery, a position that, as he'd so cruelly pointed out, he'd arranged for me. "It's minimum wage plus commission," Diane continued. "Nothing glamorous." "That's fine. I needed any income one could get. When can I start?" "Tomorrow 9 a.m. She smiled warmly. "Wear comfortable shoes." As I left the bookstore, a familiar car pulled up to the curb. My stomach dropped as James stepped out, looking perfectly put together in his designer suit. "Mira," he called as if we'd bumped into each other by chance. "I've been worried about you. How did you find me?" I backed away, glancing around for witnesses. "Does it matter?" He smiled, that charming smile that once made my heart race. Now it just made me nauseous. "We need to talk. I've been trying to reach you. After you emptied our account and canceled my cards?" His expression hardened slightly before smoothing out again. "A misunderstanding with the bank. I've been trying to fix it." He reached for my arm. "Let me take you to lunch and explain." I jerked away. "Don't touch me. Mira, you're making a scene." His voice lowered to that reasonable tone he used when he thought I was being emotional. "I know you're upset, but this isn't like you. You don't know anything about me," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Not anymore." His facade cracked just for a moment. "You think you can just throw away 3 years? Everything I've done for you?" Before I could respond, Diane appeared beside me. "Everything okay out here?" she asked, eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. "Fine," James said smoothly. "Just talking to my fiancé." "Ex-fiancé," I corrected. "And we're done talking." I turned and walked back into the bookstore, Diane following close behind. Through the window, I watched James stand there for a long moment before getting back into his car and driving away. "Ex-trouble?" Diane asked, locking the door behind us. I nodded, hands still shaking. "Been there." She patted my shoulder. "Why don't you start today? I could use the help with inventory." As I followed her to the back room, I realized I'd taken another step away from James, and toward whatever came next. 3 months later, I barely recognized my reflection in the coffee shop window. My hair, once long because James preferred it that way, now fell in a sharp bob just below my chin. The severe bangs I'd cut myself during a 2 a.m. moment of rebellion had grown out into something intentionally stylish. "Earth to Mira," Elena waved her hand in front of my face. "You're doing it again." "Sorry." I turned away from my reflection. "What were you saying?" "I was saying that Ben from the bookstore has asked about you 3 times this week." She wiggled her eyebrows suggestively. "He's cute. And he brings you coffee." "He brings everyone coffee," I protested, though the thought of Ben, with his quiet laugh and encyclopedic knowledge of obscure poets, made me smile. "Besides, I'm not ready." Elena sighed dramatically. "It's been 3 months since James." Not everyone is a manipulative sociopath, you know. I know, but... I trailed off, unable to articulate the fear that lived in my chest, that I'd choose wrong again, that I couldn't trust my own judgment. Just coffee, Elena pressed. Not a marriage proposal. Before I could answer, my phone lit up with a notification. My photography teacher had posted my recent assignment to the class gallery with a glowing comment. A small thrill ran through me as I showed Elena. Professor Santos says I have remarkable instinct for composition. I couldn't keep the pride from my voice. I told you. Elena clinked her mug against mine. The mirror renaissance continues. After James, I'd made a list of things I wanted to reclaim. Interests, dreams, and parts of myself I'd abandoned during our relationship. Photography topped the list. I'd loved it since high school but set it aside when James called it a hobby rather than a viable career path. The community college photography class was my first step. Using a second-hand camera purchased with my bookstore earnings, I rediscovered my eye for detail, my love of light and shadow. Each week brought new confidence, new skills, and a growing portfolio. Santos also asked if I'd be interested in assisting on a commercial shoot next month. I added, trying to sound casual despite my excitement. Paid work. See. Elena beamed. I told you he recognized your talent. My phone buzzed again, a text from Ben, customer asking for photography books. Any recommendations besides the usual Adams and Leibovitz? I smiled as I texted back suggestions, then glanced up to find Elena watching me with a knowing expression. Just work, I insisted. She hummed, unconvinced. So when are you going to say yes to that coffee date? Before I could respond, another notification appeared on my phone. An email from James's lawyer. My stomach clenched as I opened it. He's suing me, I said, scanning the legal jargon. For emotional distress and defamation of character. Elena snatched the phone. What the hell? How is this even possible? He claims I've been spreading malicious falsehoods about him to mutual friends. I laughed bitterly. I've barely spoken to anyone we knew together. The truth was, most of our mutual friends had been James's friends first. After the breakup, they'd sided with him almost unanimously. Only our old neighbor Alex had reached out to check on me, confessing he'd never liked how James treated me. This is harassment, Elena said firmly. We need to talk to my lawyer friend. Later that evening, as I walked home from the bookstore, I found myself taking a detour past the gallery where I used to work. Through the windows I could see a new exhibition being installed, black and white portraits, stark and intimate. I remembered my dream of having my own show someday, a dream I'd shared with James early in our relationship. He'd smiled indulgently and suggested I focus on more practical goals. Now, standing outside the gallery, I made a decision. I pulled out my phone and texted Ben, coffee tomorrow before my shift? Your recommendation on which cafe has the best lighting for portrait practice. His response came immediately. Absolutely. 8 a.m. at Lighthouse Cafe. Great north-facing windows. I smiled, feeling a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in a long time, possibility. Back at Elena's apartment, I spread my portfolio across the coffee table. Professor Santos had encouraged me to apply for a small local exhibition, something I wouldn't have dreamed of doing 3 months ago. The deadline was next week. These are incredible, Elena said, examining a series I'd taken of elderly craftspeople at work. Especially this one. She pointed to my favorite, an 80-year-old glassblower caught in a moment of intense concentration, her wrinkled face illuminated by the glow of molten glass. Santos thinks I should submit a series on workers whose crafts are becoming obsolete, I explained. He's helping me connect with more subjects. Remember when you wanted to do that photo essay on urban renewal, and James said it was overdone? Elena asked, her voice careful. I nodded, the memory surprisingly distant now. He had a way of making my ideas seem small. Because he was threatened by them, Elena said fiercely. By you. My phone pinged with another notification. Not James this time, but a former colleague from the magazine where I'd worked before meeting him. Mira. Heard you're back into photography. We need a last-minute replacement for a spread next month. Interested? I stared at the message, equal parts excited and terrified. The magazine was small but respected, exactly the kind of opportunity one would have jumped at before James. What is it? Elena asked, noting my expression. A chance, I said quietly. A real chance. That night, as I edited photos for class, I found myself working on an old image I'd taken years ago. A self-portrait captured in the reflection of a broken mirror, my face fractured but recognizable. In my photography journal I wrote, "Sometimes you have to break to become something new." The next morning, as I got ready to meet Ben, I noticed James had sent another email. I hovered my finger over the notification, then deliberately swiped it away. Whatever he had to say, it could wait. I had a coffee date, a portfolio to build, and a future to reclaim, one frame at a time. The law office was smaller than I expected, tucked into a converted Victorian house on a quiet street. Elena's friend Laura, an attorney who specialized in restraining orders and domestic cases, had agreed to meet with me pro bono after hearing my situation. These lawsuits are rarely about winning, Laura explained, scanning James's filing. They're about control and intimidation. He wants to drain your resources and keep you engaged in his drama. It's working, I admitted. I can barely afford rent and photography supplies, let alone legal fees. Laura set down the papers. The good news is his case is weak. Without evidence that you've actually defamed him, it's just an expensive tantrum. So what do I do? First, document everything. Every text, email, unexpected appearance. Second, we file a counter-motion to dismiss. She leaned forward. But there's something else we should discuss. Has he contacted Vanessa since you left? The question caught me off guard. I wouldn't know. We're not exactly on speaking terms. It might be worth finding out, Laura suggested. If he's harassing both of you, it strengthens any case we might build. I left the meeting with a knot in my stomach. The thought of contacting Vanessa made me queasy, but Laura's logic was sound. If James was systematically targeting both of us, it established a pattern of behavior that could help our case. That evening, after my photography class, I found myself parked outside the architectural firm where Vanessa worked. I'd found her LinkedIn profile easily enough. The professional headshot showed a woman with sharp eyes and a confident smile, exactly the type I'd always imagined would attract James. I waited until I saw her exit the building, then approached cautiously. Vanessa. She turned, confusion crossing her face before recognition dawned. You're James's fiancée. Ex-fiancée, I corrected. Can we talk? She hesitated, glancing at her watch. I have dinner plans. It won't take long. It's about James. I paused. And his lawsuit. Her expression changed. He's suing you too? Those 3 words, you too, changed everything. 20 minutes later, we sat across from each other at a nearby coffee shop, comparing stories. The parallels were unsettling. The love bombing in the beginning, the gradual isolation from friends and family, the financial control. I thought I was free when we broke up 2 years ago, Vanessa said, stirring her untouched coffee. Then he started calling again in February, claiming he'd changed. February. My hand froze midway to my cup. We were already engaged then. She nodded grimly. He never mentioned you. Said he'd been single, focusing on his career. When we met for drinks, he showed me an empty apartment, said he was thinking of buying it, wanted my opinion. The apartment you were supposedly getting together, I murmured, pieces clicking into place. The one he drained our account for. He was playing us both, Vanessa said, her voice hardening. And now he's punishing us for figuring it out. I studied her face, searching for signs of deception, but found only the weary recognition of someone who'd been through the same storm. Why did you break up originally? I asked. Vanessa's laugh was bitter. I caught him with another woman. Rachel something. She thought they were exclusive too. By the end of our conversation, we'd identified at least 4 women James had manipulated simultaneously over the past 3 years, using the same tactics on each of us. We should find them, I suggested. Rachel and the others. If we all come forward together. You want to build a case. Vanessa nodded, her architect's mind already structuring the approach. Multiple witnesses, similar experiences, documented patterns. Exactly. He can't dismiss all of us as emotional or vindictive. For the first time since entering the coffee shop, Vanessa smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. You know what? I think James made a serious miscalculation when he messed with you. Over the next 2 weeks, Vanessa and I worked together, tracking down the other women from James's past. Rachel, now married and living in Seattle, provided emails showing James's manipulation tactics. Sydney, a yoga instructor he'd dated briefly, shared threatening texts he'd sent after she ended things. The pattern was clear. James targeted successful women going through vulnerable periods, love-bombed them with attention, gradually isolated them from support networks, then established financial control. When they eventually discovered his infidelity, as they all did, he would alternate between tearful apologies and vicious threats. I was compiling our findings when Laura called with news. You need to come to my office, she said, her voice unusually tight. Bring Vanessa if you can. An hour later we sat across from Laura as she slid a thick folder across her desk. A colleague in financial crimes passed this along, she explained. James Wright is under investigation for wire fraud and identity theft. Apparently he's been opening credit cards in his partner's names for years. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? They've been building a case quietly. Your restraining order request put you on their radar. Laura tapped the folder. There are at least 7 victims they know of. Vanessa let out a long breath. That explains why my credit was suddenly trashed after we broke up. I thought I'd just been careless with payments. It gets worse, Laura continued. He's done this before in multiple states. Different name, same MO. His real name isn't even James Wright. The room seemed to spin around me. 3 years with a man whose real name I didn't even know. What happens now? I asked. The DA wants statements from both of you, Laura said. And from any other victims willing to come forward. On the drive home, Vanessa was quiet, her profile sharp against the evening light. I actually thought I loved him, she said finally, her voice small. How did I not see this? Because he's good at what he does, I replied. And because we wanted to believe we were special. That night I couldn't sleep. I scrolled through old photos of James and me, looking for signs I should have seen, evidence of the predator behind the charming smile. Instead I found myself mourning the future I'd once imagined. The wedding we'd planned, the children we'd discussed, the life I thought we were building. Not because I wanted it back, but because I needed to acknowledge what I'd lost before I could fully move forward. My phone buzzed with a text from Ben. Thinking of you. Hope the legal stuff isn't too overwhelming. I smiled in the darkness. Ben, who brought me coffee without expecting anything in return. Ben, who listened when I spoke and remembered what I said. Ben, who knew my past but saw my future. One day at a time, I texted back. Coffee tomorrow? Wouldn't miss it, came his reply. Miss Patel, can you describe the nature of your relationship with the defendant? I sat in the witness chair, hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. The preliminary hearing for James's financial fraud case had drawn a small crowd, mostly other victims and a few reporters from local outlets. James sat at the defense table wearing a suit I recognized, one I'd helped him choose for important meetings. We were engaged, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. We lived together for 2 years before I discovered he was simultaneously involved with multiple women. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane Curtis, nodded. And during your relationship, did Mr. Wright, or Mr. Ellison as we now know him to be, have access to your financial information? Yes. He managed our finances. He said it made sense since he worked in finance and I hesitated, embarrassed by how easily I'd surrendered my independence. He convinced me I wasn't good with money. Yet you maintained a solid credit score before meeting him, correct? Yes. I had no debt and modest savings. And after your relationship ended? I took a deep breath. I discovered he had opened 3 credit cards in my name. There was over $20,000 in debt I knew nothing about. James didn't meet my eyes, but I caught the subtle tightening of his jaw, the same tell he'd had when we argued, and he knew he was wrong but wouldn't admit it. The questioning continued for another 30 minutes. When I finally stepped down, my legs felt like water. Vanessa, waiting in the gallery, squeezed my hand as I slid in beside her. "You did great," she whispered. The court recessed for lunch and we escaped to a cafe across the street. Rachel and Sydney, two more of James's victims, joined us. What had begun as a legal alliance had evolved into something like friendship. Survivors of the same shipwreck helping each other to shore. "I still can't believe he's done this to so many women," Rachel said, stirring her iced tea. "And that none of us saw through him." "That's how predators work," Sydney replied. "They're counting on our silence, our shame." My phone buzzed with a text from Ben. "Photo editor loved your portfolio. Wants to meet next week. Proud of you." I couldn't help smiling even amid the stress of the day. "Someone special?" Rachel asked, catching my expression. "Maybe," I admitted. "It's early." "Good for you," Vanessa said with genuine warmth. "Not everyone is James." After lunch, we returned to the courthouse to find a commotion in the hallway. James's attorney was speaking to reporters, his expression grave. "My client maintains his innocence and looks forward to clearing his name at trial." As we approached, James emerged from a side door, flanked by an older couple I recognized from photos, his parents. His mother, a thin woman with the same sharp features as her son, spotted me and broke away from the group. "You," she hissed, stepping directly into my path. "This is your fault. You've ruined his life with your lies." Vanessa stepped forward protectively, but I placed a hand on her arm. "Mrs. Ellison," I said, keeping my voice low, "your son is facing charges in 3 states. This isn't about me or any one person. It's about a pattern of behavior that spans years." "He had a bright future before you came along," she insisted. "You never deserved him." The words that once would have crushed me now bounced off harmlessly. "You're right," I agreed calmly. "I deserved better." Her face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, James appeared at her side. "Mother, let's go," he said, his voice tight. "They're not worth it." Our eyes met, and for a brief moment, I glimpsed something beneath his practiced facade, not remorse but fear. The realization that his actions had finally caught up with him. 2 weeks later, I stood in a small gallery downtown, surrounded by my photographs. Professor Santos had not only recommended me for the exhibition but had also connected me with a mentor program for emerging photographers. "These are stunning," the gallery owner said, examining my series on artisans and overlooked workers. "Particularly this triptych." She indicated 3 black-and-white images of elderly hands at work. A weaver, a blacksmith, and a potter. Hands marked by age and expertise, creating beauty from raw materials. "I call it survival," I explained. "It's about resilience and transformation." Across the room, I spotted Elena arriving with Ben, both beaming with pride. As they made their way toward me, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Financial advisor James Ellison accepts plea deal in fraud case. I switched off my phone and tucked it away. Tonight wasn't about James or what he'd done. It was about what I was building from the wreckage he'd left behind. Later, as Ben and I walked along the river after the gallery closing, he asked, "Did you see the news about the plea deal?" I nodded. 5 years. It doesn't seem like enough. Are you disappointed? I considered the question carefully. Not really. The important thing is that he can't do this to anyone else. Ben was quiet for a moment. You know, most people wouldn't have found the strength to do what you did. Stand up to him, help build the case, support the other women. I didn't feel strong, I admitted. I was terrified most of the time. That's what makes it brave. He stopped walking and turned to face me. Doing it anyway despite the fear. In the soft glow of the streetlights, I saw no calculation in his expression, no hidden agenda, just genuine admiration. For the first time in years, I didn't second-guess the moment or search for hidden meaning. When he leaned in, I met him halfway. The kiss was gentle, unhurried. Not a declaration or a demand, Just a question, an invitation. When we pulled apart, I was smiling. Was that okay? He asked, suddenly shy. More than okay, I assured him. As we continued walking, his hand found mine, fingers intertwining naturally. Up ahead, the city skyline glittered against the night sky, each light a possibility, a future I was finally free to choose. There's an assignment I've been thinking about, I said, ideas flowing freely now. A series on women rebuilding their lives after trauma. Not just survival but reinvention. Sounds powerful, Ben replied. I'd love to see it when you're ready. When you're ready. For simple words that acknowledged where I'd been and respected where I was going. I think I might be, I said softly. Ready, I mean. To start something new. He squeezed my hand in response and we walked on toward whatever came next. 6 months after leaving James, I found myself back in a courtroom. Despite the plea deal offered in the financial fraud case, James had rejected it at the last minute, insisting on a full trial. His attorney claimed they had evidence that would exonerate him, that the women testifying against him had conspired together out of jealousy and vindictiveness. Classic Darvo, Laura explained when I called her in a panic. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. It's a common tactic for abusers. Still, the news had sent me spiraling. 4 days I couldn't sleep, imagining James walking free, starting over with a new name in a new city, finding another woman to manipulate and destroy. He won't win, Vanessa assured me over coffee the morning of my testimony. We have documentation, financial records, identical stories from women who never met until this case. What if it's not enough? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then we'll have tried. And either way, we've warned others. That article you did with the magazine has already reached thousands of women. The spread in my old magazine, The Invisible Wounds of Financial Abuse, had featured anonymous stories from James's victims, alongside resources for recognizing and escaping similar situations. The response had been overwhelming, with dozens of women reaching out to share their own experiences. The courtroom was more crowded than the preliminary hearing had been. The story had gained traction in local media, particularly after James's identity deception came to light. I recognized several journalists, including one from a national news program. The state calls Meera Patel to the stand. I walked forward on legs that felt like stilts, hyper-aware of James watching me. He looked thinner than before, the confidence in his posture diminished but not gone. When I reached the stand and swore to tell the truth, my voice sounded distant to my own ears. The prosecutor began methodically, establishing the timeline of our relationship before moving into the financial manipulation. Ms. Patel, did the defendant ever explain why he needed to control all financial aspects of your household? He said he was protecting me, I replied, remembering the conversations clearly now. That I wasn't financially literate enough to manage my own money. That if I loved him, I'd trust him to handle it. And what happened when you questioned his decisions? He would get defensive, say I was ungrateful. I took a deep breath. Once, when I asked about a large withdrawal, he didn't speak to me for 3 days. Said I was accusing him of stealing from me. After that, I stopped asking. The questions continued, each one peeling back another layer of James's systematic control. The credit cards opened in my name without my knowledge. The manipulation that led me to quit my stable job. The isolation from friends who might have helped me see the truth. Then came the cross-examination. James's defense attorney, a silver-haired man with a deceptively grandfatherly demeanor, approached with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Patel, you testified that you allowed Mr. Ellison to manage your finances. Is that correct? Yes, but... A simple yes will suffice, he interrupted smoothly. And you provided him with your social security number and other personal information willingly, did you not? Yes, for our apartment application. So you voluntarily shared sensitive information with my client. And you never once checked your credit report during your 3-year relationship. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. No. In fact, you didn't discover these alleged unauthorized accounts until after your relationship ended on less than amicable terms? I found out after he cleaned out our joint account, yes. Isn't it possible, Ms. Patel, that you were aware of these accounts all along and only claimed ignorance after your bitter breakup? The prosecutor objected and the judge sustained, but the implication hung in the air. I gripped the edge of the witness stand, willing myself to stay calm. One last question, Ms. Patel. Have you been in contact with the other accusers in this case? Specifically Vanessa Chin, Rachel Morales, and Sydney Kim. Yes, after we all realized. So you admit to communicating with the other witnesses before trial, he interrupted, his voice suggesting he'd caught me in a damning admission. No further questions. As I stepped down, I caught James's eye. For the first time he smiled at me, that charming, confident smile that had once made my heart race. Now it just confirmed what I already knew. He believed he would win. During the lunch recess, I found a quiet corner of the courthouse and called Ben. "How's it going?" he asked, his voice a balm to my frayed nerves. His lawyer made me look like I'm either financially irresponsible or lying for revenge, I said, fighting tears. Maybe both. Mira, listen to me. Everyone in that courtroom who's ever been manipulated by someone they trusted understands what happened to you. Including the jury. You can't know that. I know that the truth has a way of showing itself even when people try to bury it. His voice softened. And I know you. You're the strongest person I've ever met, even when you don't feel strong. His words steadied me enough to return to the courtroom for the afternoon session. Vanessa was on the stand now, her testimony echoing mine in disturbing ways. The same manipulation tactics, even the same phrases James had used to gain control. The defense attorney tried the same approach with her, implying that she was financially negligent or vindictive. But Vanessa, with her architect's precision, countered each insinuation with documented evidence. Dates, times, bank statements she'd managed to preserve despite James's efforts. When Rachel and Sydney testified next, the pattern became undeniable. For women who had never met before this case, from different backgrounds and professions, all describing identical experiences with the same man. By the time the prosecution rested its case, something had shifted in the courtroom. I could feel it in the jury's attentive posture, in the way they looked at James now, not with sympathy but with growing suspicion. The defense began their case the next day, calling character witnesses who described James as generous, trustworthy, a real gentleman. Former colleagues testified to his professional ethics and financial acumen. Then, unexpectedly, James himself took the stand. He was masterful, I had to admit. Soft-spoken and contrite in all the right places, confused and wounded in others. He admitted to misunderstandings and poor communication, but adamantly denied fraud or identity theft. I loved these women, he said, his voice breaking perfectly on cue. I would never intentionally hurt them. Watching him perform, because that's what it was, a performance I'd seen countless times, I felt something unexpected. Pity. The realization that he would always be this person, moving through life creating false realities, never experiencing genuine connection. On the final day of trial, as we awaited the jury's verdict, James's mother approached me in the hallway. She looked older than she had weeks before, the strain evident in the lines around her mouth. He was always such a charming boy, she said, her voice distant. Everyone loved him. But things would disappear. Money from my purse, my jewelry. When we confronted him, he'd cry, make up elaborate stories. His father always believed him. Before I could respond, she walked away, rejoining her husband outside the courtroom doors. When the jury returned after just 4 hours of deliberation, I held my breath. As the foreman read guilty on all counts, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just an overwhelming sense of relief. James showed no reaction as the judge ordered him remanded into custody pending sentencing. But as the officers approached to escort him out, he turned and locked eyes with me one final time. In that moment I saw him clearly, not as the charming man I'd once loved, nor as the monster who had systematically destroyed lives, but simply as a broken person whose emptiness would never be filled. And with that understanding came the final piece of my healing. Compassion not for what he'd done, but for how lonely his existence must truly be. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by the other women whose courage had made this moment possible, I looked up at the clear blue sky and took my first truly free breath in years. 1 year later, I stood in the empty living room of my new house. A modest two-bedroom craftsman with worn hardwood floors and windows that caught the afternoon light perfectly. The real estate agent had called it a fixer-upper, but I preferred blank canvas. "This is the last box," Elena announced, setting down a container labeled photography supplies in my hasty scrawl. "I still can't believe you're leaving me for this project." I smiled at her dramatic tone. "It's 15 minutes away, not another country." "Still." She surveyed the space critically. "That kitchen needs a complete overhaul. And what's with that bathroom tile?" "It has good bones," I defended, running my hand along the original crown molding. "And it's mine. Every creaky floorboard, every outdated fixture. Mine." Elena's expression softened. "When you put it that way, it's perfect." After James's sentencing, 8 years with possibility of parole after 5, I'd thrown myself into rebuilding. The magazine assignment had led to a part-time position as a staff photographer. Combined with freelance work and weekend shifts at the bookstore, I'd saved enough for a modest down payment. The house was far from my dream home, but it represented something more important than aesthetic perfection: independence. Ben arrived an hour later with pizza and a housewarming gift wrapped in brown paper. "I know you said no gifts," he said, handing me the package, "but this doesn't count. It's practical." Inside was a vintage film camera, a Rolleiflex from the 1950s, beautifully restored and gleaming in the afternoon light. "Ben," I breathed, turning it over in my hands. "This must have cost." "Don't worry about that," he interrupted gently. "It belonged to my grandfather. He taught me everything I know about photography." I thought he'd want you to have it. We'd been dating for nearly 8 months now, taking things slowly by mutual agreement. Ben understood my hesitation, my moments of irrational panic when he did something as simple as pay for dinner twice in a row. He never pushed, never demanded, just steadily showed up, day after day, proving through actions rather than words that he was nothing like James. After dinner, Elena left to meet friends, leaving Ben and me sitting on the floor of my empty living room, backs against the wall, shoulders touching. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noticing my silence. "About the first night after I left James," I replied honestly. "I was so scared. I had no idea what would happen next. If you told me then that in a year I'd have my own place, a photography career." I hesitated, then finished, "Someone like you in my life, I wouldn't have believed it." He took my hand, intertwining our fingers. "You did this, Mira. All of it." "Not alone," I acknowledged. "Elena, Vanessa, Laura, I had help." "That's not weakness," he reminded me. "That's being human." The next morning I woke early, sunlight streaming through curtainless windows. For a moment, disoriented in the unfamiliar space, panic gripped me, then ebbed as I remembered. This was home now. My home. I made coffee in the ancient percolator Elena had insisted I take. It makes better coffee than that pod monstrosity, and carried it onto the small back porch. The yard was overgrown, the garden beds choked with weeds, but I could see the potential. Herbs near the kitchen, perhaps a vegetable patch along the fence, flowers to attract butterflies and hummingbirds. My phone chimed with a text from Vanessa. "First day of your workshop, knock 'em dead." After the trial, Vanessa and I had maintained our unexpected friendship. She'd encouraged me when I'd tentatively proposed a photography workshop for survivors of domestic abuse. A safe space where women could reclaim their narratives through images. The local women's shelter had embraced the idea enthusiastically. I texted back, nervous but ready. "House is a disaster but I love it. Dinner next week." 3 hours later I stood before a group of 8 women at the community center. Their faces reflected varying degrees of weariness, hope, and exhaustion. Expressions I recognized intimately from my own mirror a year ago. "I'm Mira," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "And I'm not going to tell you that photography will fix everything. It won't. But it gave me back something essential when I'd lost almost everything else. My perspective. My way of seeing the world and my place in it. I passed out simple point-and-shoot cameras. donated by a local electronics store after they read about the program in the magazine article. For our first exercise, I continued, we're going to practice seeing everyday objects differently. Finding beauty in the overlooked. A woman in the back row, Grace according to her name tag, raised her hand. I'm not creative, she said apologetically. I've never been good at art. She reminded me so much of myself a year ago, apologizing for taking up space, assuming failure before beginning, that my heart ached. That's what I thought too, I told her. But here's the thing about creativity. It isn't about being good at something. It's about seeing in a way that's uniquely yours. As the workshop progressed, I watched the women gradually relax, their initial self-consciousness giving way to curiosity and occasional laughter. When Grace showed me her first experimental shot, a close-up of her scarred hands cradling a blooming succulent, I knew she'd gotten it. This is beautiful, I told her truthfully. She smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her. It's just my hands. They're not. They're strong, I interrupted gently. They've survived. Like you. That evening, as I unpacked boxes in my new kitchen, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. When I answered, a hesitant voice asked, "Is this Meera Patel? The photographer from the domestic abuse article?" "Yes," I replied cautiously. "My name is Allison," the woman said. I think I might be dating James Allison. Or whatever he's calling himself now." My blood ran cold. "That's not possible. He's in prison." "Not anymore," she said quietly. "Early release for good behavior. We met online 3 weeks ago. He said his name was Michael. But I just saw your article and the description. It's him. I'm sure of it." I sank into a chair, mind racing. "Allison, where are you now? Are you safe?" "Yes, I'm at my sister's. I canceled our date tonight. He's been calling non-stop." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Listen carefully. I'm going to give you some numbers to call, and then I want you to tell me everything. How you met, what he's told you about himself, everything." An hour later, I'd connected Allison with Laura and the prosecutor from James's case. If he'd violated parole conditions, they could get him back in custody. If not, at least Allison was warned. When I finally hung up, I sat in my half-unpacked kitchen, shaking. For a moment, old fears threatened to overwhelm me, that James would always be out there, that I'd never truly be free. Then I looked around at the home I'd created, thought of the work I loved, the people who stood beside me, and the woman I'd become during this long, difficult year. I wasn't the same person James had controlled and manipulated. I was stronger now, wiser. Not because of what he'd done to me, but because of what I'd done afterward. Chosen to rebuild, to connect, to create meaning from pain. That night, I hung a single photograph in my otherwise empty living room. The broken mirror self-portrait, now framed alongside a new image. Me standing at the threshold of my new home, face turned toward the light, stepping forward into whatever came next. Freedom, I was learning, wasn't just about escaping something. It was about moving toward something else. A life built deliberately, choice by choice, day by day. My life. At last.